Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. I'm going to be talking about my favorite aspect of this UFO phenomena, which is of course humanoids. I find these cases endlessly fascinating. They have so much to teach us. I think they represent really solid proof that we are not alone in this universe. So the cases I've chosen for you today are ones that are lesser known. I like finding these cases that are more obscure, ones that people haven't heard of before. And I think that these cases you probably haven't heard before. These cases reach pretty far back in time, all the way to the 1940s, all the way up to the 2010s. So that's 8 decades. So I'm going to be taking you kind of on a journey, not only through time, but through space, because these cases come from a wide variety of different locations. I like finding cases all over the world because this phenomenon is ubiquitous. It's certainly not confined to the United States, as some people have asserted. No, these cases occur everywhere on planet Earth. And the 10 cases I've chosen for you today include Finland, Australia, Argentina, and Brazil, and 6 cases from the United States, including Alabama, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Washington, and Wisconsin. These do include a wide variety of extraterrestrial types, so we see human-looking ETs, which is always interesting to me, but glowing beings, greys of course, short little dwarfs. The variety of humanoids is really astonishing. So we definitely see that in these cases. Yeah, I call this Aliens from Other Worlds, 10 Shocking Encounters, because honestly, that is the theme we see in so many of these kinds of accounts. It's a really huge shock, a real big surprise for witnesses when they suddenly have this encounter with really little or no warning. And it's especially traumatic if people have not heard of this subject before. It's one of the reasons I do this research. I think we all deserve to know the truth about the fact that we are not alone. These cases are far more numerous than most people believe. So yeah, that's the sort of theme for today's episode. Let's just get started. First case I want to talk about is a very early case, which I call I Will Remember This Event Until the Day I Die. That is, of course, a first-hand quote from the witness himself. And it is something that a lot of witnesses talk about, how truly memorable and impactful their encounter is. This one occurred one morning in 1946 in Cheviot, Ohio. What's interesting to me about this case is that this occurred long before the idea of extraterrestrials had really been publicized at all. The witness in this case is anonymous. I'll call him Will. He had a face-to-face encounter with a humanoid that left a lifelong impression on him. In fact, it's taken him 60 years to come forward. This incident occurred one morning around 1946 when he was only 6 or 7 years old. And I'll just quote Will directly. As he says, "It was around mid-morning. I was visiting my aunt. Her home at that time was in the country in Cheviot, Ohio. Their basement garage was built under their house, which is where I was when this happened. I was playing with my aunt's music box. My back was to the garage door, which was open, when I felt like something was wrong. I turned towards the open door, and there was a creature looking at me. I don't know just how tall I was at that time, but it seemed to be about my size. Its head was larger than its body, with large eyes, small arms, and what looked to be hands. It was stooped over slightly. The most strange part about this figure was that I could see its veins. I didn't feel frightened, but I wanted my aunt to see this. So I turned and ran up the basement stairs where my aunt was, and by the time I convinced her to go down to the garage, the figure was gone. And of course she told me not to go around telling people about what I thought I saw, because it was all just in my head." So needless to say, Will disagrees, and he remains vehement that he saw a strange creature of some kind. And although the duration of the sighting was only a few seconds, it was long enough for him to get a good look at this creature and know that it was real and that it was not human. As Will says, "I am now 66 years old. I have told this story to many people in my life, and everyone has thought that I've made this up. I guess it is because my life is growing short that I want to make a real effort to tell my story. Until the day I die, I will remember this event. I wonder just what that creature was thinking when we were just standing there looking at each other. I hope you believe me, and if you do, you will be the first. An amazing case. That's the kind of case that really makes me feel for the witness. He was so young when he had his encounter. Quite a few people do have encounters when they're very young, and so they have to deal with that at a very young age. And then there's the double whammy of not being believed. I think it might be easier for people if they'd heard of Greys or ETs before, but in these early cases, no. This is something that's absolutely out of a person's world experience. So I think that makes it even more impactful. Now let's move to the next case, which is equally astonishing, I think. I call this one, I Was So Frightened. This one occurred on December 9, 1954, in a small little town in Brazil called Linha Bela Vista. This one actually involves a series of encounters. This occurred right after the tail end of a huge wave of humanoids in France, but really across Europe and to some extent all over the world. 1954 was a big year for this subject, and the series of events that occurred in Brazil involved quite a few sightings and quite a few humanoid cases as well. And once again, we see that theme where people are absolutely surprised to find themselves a witness to something that's truly amazing. This case comes from researcher João Martins, and it first appeared in the Brazilian magazine O Cruzeiro. This is a mainstream magazine which was known for its openness to the UFO subject. The witness is an uneducated farmer by the name of Olmiro da Costa e Rosa. It was around 5 p.m. on December 9, 1954, and Olmiro was feeding his farm animals bean plants and corn on his property in Linha Bela Vista in Brazil. Without warning, his cows and other farm animals began to scatter in fear, and this is when he realized something unusual was happening. As he says, I suddenly heard a strange sound, almost like a sewing machine. I looked around and up and saw a strange person close to me, staring at me intently. A short distance away, hovering close to the ground, I saw a flying object that looked like an explorer's hat. The object was cream-colored and seemed to be surrounded by transparent smoke. 2 human beings were visible in the object. One stood in the upper door, while the other looked closely at the metal wire fence that surrounded my field. Now, per Olmiro, the 3 beings were of normal height, with white complexions, which Olmiro compared to a cadaver. They had long blonde hair, slanted eyes, unlike a normal person. He did notice that their hair was blowing in the wind. He said that they had broad shoulders, and they were all wearing one-piece light brown overalls, which fastened to strange-looking shoes with no heels on them. Now the craft, he said, was about 15 meters in diameter, that's 45 feet, round in shape, and it was glowing brightly. Now at this point, Olmiro was paralyzed with fear. As he says, I was so frightened that I dropped the hoe that I had just held in my hand. The stranger made a gesture that resembled a military salute, smiled, picked up my hoe, looked at it curiously from all sides, and then handed it back to me. So after handing him back his garden hoe, the being took one of the plants from Olmiro and began to go back to the craft. Now, according to some sources, the being instead picked a few plants from the ground, but it seems more likely that Olmiro handed them to the being, as his crops would not likely be in the same field where his animals were being kept. At any rate, this is what Olmiro said happened next. He turned and walked back towards the machine, and somewhat hesitantly I followed. However, the one stranger who had watched the field fence and the sheep in the field gestured me to stand back. So at this point, some of the farm animals lost their fear and began to approach, including the sheep, and the UFO occupants started looking at these animals with apparent great interest. Olmiro now had the sense that these beings were friendly, and using words and gestures, he tried to communicate to the strange men that they were welcome to take one of his sheep if they wanted. But these visitors from the UFO either did not understand or were not interested in his sheep. Olmiro shouted out to his neighbors, who later confirmed that they had heard him shouting, but none of his neighbors approached, and the three occupants ended the meeting. Now, as Olmiro says, all three of them quickly disappeared into the craft, which rose into the air with tremendous speed and soon disappeared from sight. So after the craft left, Olmiro did notice an odor which he said was similar to burning coal, and it remained in the air for some time. He did check the ground where this strange craft had hovered, but didn't find anything unusual. Olmiro's encounter did catch the attention of the Brazilian authorities, who began an investigation. Olmiro could not read. He had never heard of flying saucers. He expressed his opinion that the machine and its crew must belong to a foreign nation on Earth. Now, the authorities found him to be a very credible witness and an honest man, and it was them who told him that this might have actually been a craft from another world piloted by extraterrestrials. And after thinking about it, Olmiro agreed that this explanation was probably the correct one. Now afterwards, Olmiro did have nightmares about this encounter. In fact, his son was interviewed many years later and asserted his opinion that his father did not lie about the encounter and that it really happened. Also, in support of Olmiro's story, is that unknown to him, 2 days later, on December 11, 1954, his next-door neighbor, Pedro Moraes, who lived about 2 kilometers away, was preparing to go to a warehouse to buy supplies when he heard his hens squawking. And he had a very unusual encounter. As Pedro says, "I heard the frightened cries of a chicken. Thinking it might be a sparrowhawk, I went outdoors to see what was happening. I still heard the chicken, but couldn't find it, because I found another thing that made me forget the original purpose of my search. I saw a strange object suspended in the air, hovering, making a noise like a sewing machine, and exhibiting an agitated oscillatory movement. It was shaped, it appeared to me, like the hood of a Jeep on the top, and like an enormous polished brass kettle on the lower part. When my eyes left the strange object, turning towards the cultivated fields, I noticed 2 figures of human shape that were walking through the tobacco fields." Now, per Pedro, these beings were quite short, about 4 feet tall, though he was unable to describe their appearance in any detail due to their strange attire. As he says, "The figures were human only in shape of the head and body. All the time I concentrated my eyes on their faces, but I didn't see the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and the ears. There was nothing of the kind. No face was visible. I got the impression that they were placed into a kind of sack or bag of yellow color, which enveloped their bodies completely from head to foot." Now, Pedro was actually more upset that somebody was trespassing his fields than he was frightened by their strange appearance, and he confronted these trespassers. As he says, "I didn't like that, and began to walk towards the machine to ask for an explanation about the invasion of the fields. One of the figures was watching my actions and immediately raised one arm, motioning me not to come any closer. Of course, I didn't obey the sign to stop and continued to walk towards the object. Seeing that I was approaching rapidly, the figure that was about 10 yards started to run towards the craft. Meanwhile, the one that was near the craft kneeled down and picked up a tobacco plant from the ground. I saw later that the plant had been rooted out abruptly. They entered together into the object, which disappeared into the sky." Now, Pedro was also uneducated. He had not heard of UFOs, and he wondered if he had perhaps seen ghosts or saints. He really had no explanation. But when he later learned that the Brazilian government was interested in these beings, he vowed to try and shoot one of them if they should return. Pedro never did see his hen and her chicks again. And it turned out that there were quite a few landings involving humanoids in this area at that time. In fact, on November 10, 1954, now some sources say October 30th, an agronomist and his wife and 2 daughters were driving in the Porto Alegre area of Brazil when they came upon a landed disc-shaped craft. They say that two men with long hair, wearing jumpsuits, emerged and began to approach their car with their hands raised. The witnesses became quite frightened and drove off. But they did see the men re-enter the disc, which now rose upwards and darted away at high speed. And it was just 4 days later, at 3:30 a.m. on November 14, 1954, that a Brazilian railway employee was inspecting the railway tracks with a lantern at Curitiba, Brazil, and this is when he saw a lens-shaped craft sitting on the rails between the Lagoinhas and Uri stations. He said three beings in tight-fitting luminous clothes emerged from the craft and used flashlight-like instruments, to examine the gravel around the rails. Upon seeing the man, the three beings returned into their craft, which quickly rose up and zoomed off. It was around that time that a teacher in nearby Uri also saw a glowing object above the town. And finally, only 6 days after Almiro Rosa's encounter, on December 15, 1954, a man was fishing near Campo Grande, Brazil, when he saw an unusual craft land a few hundred feet away from him. His dog immediately began to howl, so the fisherman used the telescopic sight of his rifle and could see that the craft was hovering about 6 feet above the ground. He said it had 3 sphere-shaped protrusions on the bottom of the craft. Another spherical object was revolving around the larger craft. And he said that 3 very short and small human-looking occupants came out of the craft and moved with rapid agility on the ground near the craft. One was holding a luminous basket of some kind, and the other was holding a tube with a cone shape on the end. And the one with the tube began to collect soil and rocks from the river's edge with the tube, which discharged the contents into the basket. They then quickly returned into their craft, which took off at high speed. The witness later found square holes in the ground at the site of the encounter. It's interesting to me how these sightings, these encounters, come in waves. I don't know what was going on in that area at that time, but clearly the ETs were doing either an exploration, perhaps a scientific study. Very hard to say for sure. Maybe this was a display. But so interesting that all these humanoid cases are clustered together in such a short period of time in a pretty specific location. Super fascinating. Now let's move to the next case. This one is also really interesting to me because it's quite unusual. Don't know that I've heard one quite like it. I really wonder what's going on with this case. I call this one, I Could Not Take My Eyes Off of Them. This occurred on February 1967 in Turku, Finland. And this one does involve multiple witnesses and a very unusual humanoid as well. 2 humanoids, in fact. This next case comes from the Finland UFO Research Organization, which has done amazing work investigating cases in their country. It was one February evening in 1967, around 8 p.m., that 2 cousins, I call them Levi and Mikko, these are pseudonyms, were playing in the driveway in front of Levi's garage, located at the intersection of Elämäntie and Hakapelinkatu in Turku, Finland. So you can see the exact location here. They were just playing, taking turns hitting a ball with hockey sticks and using the garage door as a goal. It was Levi's turn to hit the ball, and his cousin Mikko was playing the goalie. Now at some point during their play, they started to hear a very low and steady sound and wondered what it could be. It took a few moments for Levi to notice it, and when he looked in that direction, he saw 2 glowing green figures, or what he calls, quote, the phosphorescent men. And I'll just quote Levi because he describes this in great detail. As he says, I was startled and froze in place. I could not take my eyes off of them. There were 2 of them, and they were identical. The appearance of the phosphorescent men was very human-like. At least I don't remember anything special about the eyes, mouth, ears, etc. What was exceptional was the color of the skin on the face and the brightness of the rest of their appearance. The color of the face, or rather all visible skin, was uniformly scarlet red throughout. The brightness of the men was much more intense than anything else anywhere, but it still didn't dazzle the eyes. They were moving, walking very slowly, unnaturally. The distance is not long, but it took maybe almost a minute before they were a couple of meters from me. The same low-frequency, steady sound was heard all the time. Frozen in place, I could not take my eyes off them. So it was at this point that his cousin Miko, whose view of the men was blocked by the corner of the garage, was wondering why the heck Levi had stopped playing and kept asking him over and over, "What now? Hit the ball now." As Levi says, when his voice became more demanding, I managed to turn my gaze towards him and away from the phosphorus men, but I couldn't get a word out of my mouth due to my fright. In terror, I just ran away as fast as I could to the courtyard of Hakapelengatu, where we lived. He saw them almost at close range when he went to pick up the ball that had fallen on the ground in front of me. However, he didn't panic, but ran after me into the courtyard and to the front door of our staircase, the E staircase. So the two boys remained in the courtyard waiting to see if these strange glowing men would follow them, but they never did. Earlier, Levi had heard people talking about the phosphorus men, and he thought at first it was something on TV. But after his experience about 1 month later, he realized that this must be what people had been talking about. So he shared his experience with his family, but nobody else. But then, a few years later, his teacher in school mentioned that other people in the Numi district where Levi lived had also reported seeing these men. And as Levi says, "My own experience has not been forgotten, and it still comes back to mind from time to time as inexplicable and enigmatic." Such a strange case. What I do like about it is we know exactly where it occurred, and this is a very populated area. What are these humanoids doing there? How did they get there? No UFO was actually seen, so we can't say for sure that these were even extraterrestrials. Hard to say. But absolutely they were humanoid. The fact that they were glowing green and kind of phosphorescent is also very interesting. The fact that they approached these boys so closely. Where did they go? How did they disappear? There's always more questions than answers, it seems like, when we have these encounters. But a really interesting case also because the other people were reporting these figures as well. This is not an isolated case. Apparently there were quite a few accounts of these phosphorescent men being seen in this area at that time. So, I don't know. It's just case after case after case. Something is so clearly going on here. Skeptics at this point simply have not done their research, their homework. It's undeniable. The sheer number of cases, I think, provides the best evidence that there's absolutely something to this. And here's another case. This one's also super interesting. I call this one Aliens at the Car Race. This occurred on July 4, 1969 in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, on the outskirts and sort of the country. But what makes this case so interesting to me is that it looks like ETs were drawn to the fact that humans are performing this weird activity of racing their cars. So perhaps that was the draw here for the ETs, but let's take a look at this case. This very interesting case was investigated by MUFON field investigator Craig R. Lang of Minnesota MUFON and author of the book The Cosmic Bridge, Close Encounters and Human Destiny. It is a brief sighting of a UFO with aliens, but it does have some extraordinary details. It was 10:30 p.m. on July 4th, 1969, and the anonymous witness, I call her Sherry, had accompanied her father to a stock car race being held at the Auto Memories Speedway. This is now defunct. There was a large crowd of people there, but Sherry was sitting alone on the top bench of the bleachers that overlooked this oval racetrack, and this is when she got a strange feeling that somebody or something was watching her. So looking to her right and up, this is when she saw an oval-shaped object hovering only about 1,000 feet away from her and 100 feet up in the air, directly north of her at the corner of this lot, next to 2 rows of trees. It was glowing bright yellow and red, and there was a transparent rectangular section on the side of the object, a window, and she was amazed to see 3 to 5 humanoids inside this craft. She could only see their heads and shoulders, and they were only visible as silhouettes. But it did look to her like they were observing the crowd and the activities going on at the racetrack. She also had the impression that they might have been amused. She viewed them for about 8 seconds in total astonishment. She was in absolute disbelief at the sight and looked away, then immediately looked back, but the object was now gone. She was so shocked by this sighting that she did not tell anyone. As investigator Craig Lang writes, "The witness indicates that although the park was crowded, apparently no additional people sighted the object. This is notable in that a large anomalous object was apparently visible to the witness, while the rest of those present do not observe it. If this phenomenon occurred as objectively as described, its manner of appearance and disappearance greatly increased the strangeness level of the event. I can think of no phenomena, either natural or man-made, that would appear to be able to account for this event." The case does leave me with some real puzzling questions. Were they there just to sort of check out what humans were doing, racing around in circles? I mean, admittedly, that is an odd activity. I also find it interesting that there's only one witness, because there was a huge crowd of people there. This was pretty obvious, this craft, according to the witness, so it's surprising that more people didn't see it. Perhaps this was very brief, so a lot of people didn't have the opportunity. Perhaps this was meant for the witness alone. This does appear to be a one-off, which is quite unusual, because usually when people see humanoids, they often have a lifetime of unusual experiences, which is possible because I wasn't able to talk to this witness firsthand. And there's, I'm sure, more information to this case, but really fascinating. We don't really even know the types of humanoids that were seen in this case, so that would be interesting. I mean, it's possible that some of these are humans in a reverse engineered craft. But that raises even more questions, because what would they be doing showing themselves at a car race like this? Just an unusual case all around. And there's always more. This next one, I think is even more unusual. I call this one 3 Aliens in Downtown Grafton. This occurred one day in May of 1972 in Grafton, Australia. It's not a huge city, but it's not a tiny town either. This is really interesting to me because this is one example of quite a few where people see what appear to be ETs in a wholly public location, in a place you would never expect to see something like this. This is a multiple witness case as well, and there is a loose association with UFOs in that UFOs were seen in that area around that time, but no direct connection. But clearly these were unusual humanoids, and the witnesses themselves feel absolutely convinced this was not normal in any way. This truly strange encounter comes from Australian researcher Keith Basterfield. There's not a lot of detail to it, but it is quite bizarre. The witnesses were Ron Ferret and his wife, and it was one day in May 1972 that they decided to go on a shopping trip in downtown Grafton. This is in New South Wales, Australia, and they were just walking along a sidewalk when up ahead of them they saw 3 very odd-looking dwarfish people, 2 males and 1 female. They were just under 3.5 feet tall, and it looked to the witnesses that they were wearing clothes that were simulated to look like, quote, ordinary men in street clothes. Now, Mrs. Ferret had been a seamstress for many years, and she was interested because the fabric was totally unfamiliar to her. These figures were wearing sandals on their feet, and this couple who saw these beings said that these dwarf beings had rough, wrinkled skin of a deep brown color that looked very old, but at the same time the beings seemed to be young. They had large, slanted, Asian-looking eyes that seemed to, quote, pop out. They had very short hair and pointed ears. And they were also moving strangely, kind of shuffling along, looking in store windows. The couple did notice that other passers-by also noticed their strange appearance and kept well away from these figures. These beings did not speak. Mr. and Mrs. Ferret approached within several feet of them and got a very good look at them. They speculated that perhaps these three dwarfs might be performers from a visiting children's show, such as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but ultimately they concluded that this explanation did not suffice, as the figures were too strange for even that. Now, interestingly, just 1 month later, on June 23, 1972, dozens of people in Grafton called the local newspaper, the Grafton Daily Examiner, to report their sighting of a strange, bright glowing object hovering west of Grafton along the Rushforth Road. This was between 8:15 and 8:30 p.m. The reports differed slightly, but most described this object as, quote, a bright orange light which seemed to hover over the ground not far above the trees. One witness said it was cigar-shaped and had a light at each end. The police were contacted and they denied receiving any calls about it. Hard to say if these two events, the humanoids and the sighting, are related, other than being in the same area around the same time. I think that qualifies as shocking. I really wonder about these humanoids. I mean, perhaps they were people who worked at a circus or, some sort of theater or something like this. The witnesses certainly didn't think so, and they were there, so they would know better than anyone else who's just purely speculating. I would like to speak to these witnesses. I have quite a few questions, like what color were these clothes? I'd like more details on this. Personally, if something like that happened to me, I would like to follow these guys and see where they were going to. Because if they were truly ETs, I mean, that would be very interesting to see if there was a craft involved in this case. So it's the kind of case, again, that raises more questions than answers, and it's certainly fascinating. I wish there were more witnesses to that, because clearly it wasn't just this couple who saw these three dwarf-like beings. So now let's move to another case. This next case is a single witness case, anecdotal, from a child witness, but really unusual, and clearly this witness is very sincere. I call this case fascinating and beautiful. This one occurred one evening in October of 1989 in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I know other cases that have occurred in this area, but this does appear to be a singular case in which a very young child had a face-to-face encounter with what appears to be a gray ET. But the details of this case are pretty unusual, as we'll see. The witness in this case is anonymous. I call her Susanna. That is a pseudonym. She was 7 or 8 years old when she saw an alien, as she says, quote, face to face. She and her family had just moved to a rented house located at 1947 Larry Court in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Now this is a cul-de-sac with only a few homes on it. It was around 10 p.m. one evening in the fall of 1989 when this incident occurred. Susanna was reading her book, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Now this was a talking book. It was supposed to read itself out loud to her, but she couldn't get it to work right. So she decided to get her father to help her fix the book. Her father came into her room and sat down on the bed, while Susanna stood in front of him, facing him. And there was a window behind her dad with the curtains open. And I'll just let Susanna describe what happened next. As she says, I heard the crunching of the leaves, which of course directed me to look outside behind my dad. And then I saw the alien. The alien must have been tall, because even though it was a one-story house, the foundation was raised a bit. I'm guessing it was 6 to 8 feet tall. It had a huge head, and it was skinny. The eyes had detail. They looked like ours, but huge. I remember it was wearing something silver. It was fascinating and beautiful, but at the same time terrifying. I remember being absolutely frozen. I couldn't move or talk, and I just stared at the alien, which felt like an eternity. Surprisingly, the alien looked equally terrified of me, like it didn't expect to see me there staring back at him or her. I wanted so bad to scream or let my dad know, but I couldn't move to get the words out. My father had no idea, as his back was to the window. After a moment or two, the alien walked away. Now, with the alien gone, Susanna's paralysis instantly lifted, and she immediately told her dad what she had seen. Unfortunately, he dismissed it and told her that she must have seen an owl or a raccoon. Susanna, however, knows it was an alien. She had never heard of gray aliens at this point, but she had seen the movie E.T., so she knew the idea of what an alien might be. The movie E.T. had in fact terrified her. But it wasn't until 1 year later when she and her family watched the movie Communion about Whitley Strieber's encounters that she recognized what she had seen as a gray alien. She immediately told her father that the alien in the movie was exactly like the one she had seen, but again he dismissed her story. There is one final notable after effect to this account. As Susanna says, "I don't know if it was fear or a PTSD response, but since then, I could see that face every time I closed my eyes. Eventually, over time, that faded away." I wonder about that case. ETs do seem to have a tendency to kind of walk up to people's houses and look in their windows. So it makes me wonder how many ETs are walking around at night, just sort of exploring and looking into people's homes. I also wonder if this witness had further encounters, because that's a pretty close-up encounter with a humanoid. And it's interesting to me that the father was right there and didn't get the opportunity to see it. This is such a shocking experience for people that they're often just absolutely dumbstruck. It's very hard for people to react and point out these beings. But it's a fascinating case because how this witness described this ET was not malevolent, but fascinating and beautiful is how she put it. Another really interesting detail is she described this ET looking a bit frightened. She was a little frightened herself. I've noticed there's a number of cases where ETs will seem to mimic a person's reaction. If they become startled, the ET will kind of pretend to be startled. This sort of thing. So I don't know. It's a really interesting case, which I think sort of shows the humanity of the ETs themselves. They're not that different from us. But yeah, more questions than answers. And here's another one, which is definitely shocking. I call this one, "I thought it was one of Santa's elves." This occurred on December 24, 1997 in Athens, Alabama. So this is a Christmas Eve encounter. I know a number of cases that occur on Christmas Eve. So that could be pure coincidence because we only have 365 days each year, and there are encounters pretty much every day. If you peruse the vast UFO literature, you can pretty much find an encounter on any single date. But this one is interesting because, yeah, Christmas Eve, and this witness creeps out and sees this ET who, as a little child, she'd never heard of these things and assumed it was one of Santa's elves. Although Bonnie was only 5 years old when she had her encounter with an apparent extraterrestrial, even as an adult, she still remembers it vividly. It was Christmas Eve on December 24, 1997. Bonnie woke up in the bedroom of her parents' home in Athens, Alabama. Bonnie was thirsty, so she decided to tell her mom to get her something to drink. Because Christmas was the next morning, her parents had forbidden her from entering the living room until morning, so that she wouldn't see all the presents under the tree. But Bonnie figured that since she was thirsty, her parents wouldn't be angry with her. And this led to one of the strangest experiences of her life. As Bonnie says, "So I got up and left my bed. I walked through the hallway, and standing in front of the front door was a 5-foot-tall brown alien with almond eyes, a pudgy belly, thin arms, and no distinguishable gender. The being was looking around the living room as if looking for something. At that age, I didn't know what aliens were, so I thought it was one of Santa's elves. Beside it was my brand new Barbie tricycle. I thought the elf had brought it for me. So I told it, 'Thank you.' And when it turned to look at me, I waved and said, 'Hello.' It kept looking at me. I felt no fear, though, because I thought it was friendly. Then, I don't remember anything else. It's all blacked out. I woke up in my bed like nothing had happened. She felt that this was a real experience. She was not dreaming. So that morning she told her mother, confessing that she had actually seen her new tricycle. That way Bonnie figured her mother would know that it wasn't just a dream. Her mother listened and then told her to draw the elf. Bonnie immediately drew an illustration of the creature, but this turned out to frighten her mother, who immediately told her it must have been a dream. Even though Bonnie knew it wasn't, she stopped talking about it and never really thought about it. It wasn't until many years later, as an adult, that she was looking through old photographs and saw her Barbie tricycle. She asked her mom about it, and her mom did remember this incident, and together they searched for the drawing that Bonnie had made, but they weren't able to find it. But then her mom revealed something interesting. She said that other people in her family had also had, quote, otherworldly experiences. And that includes Bonnie's mother and grandmother. But as Bonnie says, mine was the closest in the family. Bonnie's mother informed her about MUFON and encouraged her daughter to report her experience. And 24 years after Bonnie saw this apparent gray ET, she did report it. And as Bonnie says, it was an alien being. I've never experienced anything similar since. Thank you for reading this. It feels good to share it after all this time. Pretty clear to me that there was missing time in that case, so I suspect there was probably some sort of onboard experience or something else going on, given that the witness pretty much blacked out in the middle of the encounter. And if I were able to talk to this witness, I suspect that I could find that they had more unusual experiences throughout their lives, because that is the pattern we see, particularly when it involves a young child who is having a very close encounter. It's one thing to have an ET look in through your window. It's quite another to have one in your home. It's interesting how the mother reacted as well. It was kind of fine, like, oh, maybe this was an elf. But when she saw the drawing, her tune kind of changed. Certainly understandable. That's got to be shocking. So now let's move to the next case. This also involves a first-hand witness who describes their story in quite some detail. I call this one The Alien in the Barn. This occurred one evening in October 1999 in the very small town of Roy, Washington, though it is near a military base, which could be significant. But it's a fascinating case, because there are many cases of ETs and UFOs showing an interest in farms and certainly in animals, and that is a pattern we do see in this case. The witness in this case was about 8 or 9 years old when he had his encounter with what appears to be a gray alien. He is anonymous, so I'll call him Kyle. At the time, he lived on a dairy farm in the small rural town of Roy, Washington. This is located about 8 miles south of Fort Lewis Army Base. Now, growing up around cows and calves had given Kyle a great love for the animals. And in fact, it was his love for the cows that one evening in October 1999 directly led to one of the most unusual experiences of his life. And I'll just quote Kyle directly. As Kyle says, "One night I heard some of the calves crying. I got up and left my house very quietly. I was not trying to get in trouble with my parents. The dairy farm was about 500 feet from my home. The time was about 2 a.m. Everyone was asleep. I arrived at the calves first. I fed them some grain. Next I went to check on the cows. As I arrived, I didn't see anything unusual, just that some of them looked impatient. They would pace back and forth in a small space. Nearly all the cows knew me, so getting close was no problem. I then started to feed them the grains as well, but they really didn't have any interest in the food. Their eyes were wide open, like they were terrified and scared. The more I noticed them pacing back and forth, and the more I noticed them cramming to one side of the building, I kind of started to feel scared myself. I saw they were all avoiding the other side of the building. So it was clear to Kyle that something must be on the other side of the building that was scaring the cows, so he cautiously took a few steps forward in that direction. He speculated that perhaps one of the cows had died, and that's what was spooking them, but when he checked, there was no dead cow, In fact, there was something much stranger. As Kyle says, then a weird feeling of being watched came upon me. I stopped looking at the beds of the cows and looked at the end of the hall. At first glance, I thought I was seeing a tree. Then I realized there were no trees at the end of the hall. I saw only half of a 4-foot-tall gray-greenish-black alien. The head was definitely bigger than the body, the eyes were almond-shaped and slanted, and it had been looking or analyzing me. My feet said run, but I couldn't run. I felt like I was moving in slow motion. I couldn't yell or talk. In a very slow way, that thing was hiding away from me behind the wall. Finally, it was a blessing to run, and I ran home, very scared. So Kyle explains that this figure was about 250 feet away from him, hiding behind a wall so he could only see the upper half of it. But he did see that it had a slender body, and reaching the house, Kyle realized he was facing another dilemma. As Kyle says, as soon as I opened the door, I knew I had to be very quiet, or else my parents were going to get the belt out. They were very strict. I tippy-toed back inside my room with my siblings, and I never told anyone about that night until now. I get constant thoughts about that night more and more now. It's another good example of a case that has a profound impact on the witness. He's still thinking about it, as he says in his testimony, which is no surprise. That has got to be an incredibly shocking experience. I do wonder what the ETs were doing, or the ET was doing there in that barn, perhaps checking out the cows. Hard to say, but an absolutely fascinating case of a close-up, face-to-face encounter with what appears to be a gray extraterrestrial. Now let's move to the next case in this compilation. This one is probably the most complicated and in some ways the most interesting. It's not just one event. This involves a series of sightings and humanoid encounters. I call this one, It Made Our Jaws Drop. The main case occurred on December 16, 2003 in this very small town of Cachi, Argentina. What makes this case so interesting is there's apparently something about this town that is very attractive to UFOs. This case does involve photographic evidence as well, and an enormous number of witnesses who have had activity over a pretty long period of time, and of course some very fascinating humanoid encounters. There is definitely something strange happening in the small town of Cachi. It is located at about 2,500 meters above sea level, that's about 8,300 feet, in Salta, Argentina. And it has become very well known for its UFO encounters, including a few astonishing cases involving humanoids. Interest in the area really ramped up in the year 2000, when over the next few years, a mountaineer by the name of Antonio Zuleta saw and actually filmed unusual lights in the area, which he said moved swiftly and strangely, and he actually saw them plunge into the ground at times. He had been alerted to the activity by an art instructor, Maria del Valle Plaza, who saw a UFO over Cachi, which she said gave off lights of different colors and moved slowly without making a sound. I never thought I'd witness anything like it, despite having been born here. I came back here after many years to have the privilege of seeing these fantastic and mysterious lights of which I've heard so many stories since childhood. So it wasn't long before Antonio Zuleta began having sightings himself and taking these photographs. And these photos, as you can see, were striking enough to capture the attention of scientists. And in May 2003, researchers Omar Hess and Jorge Milstein claimed to have detected unusual and, quote, unnatural electromagnetic signals coming from the area. And they believed these anomalous readings are significant because, as Jorge Milstein says, this is one of the hottest areas of the planet regarding extraterrestrial activity. And these UFOs just kept appearing. One evening in July 2003, two tourists were stargazing when they noticed two lights appear over the mountain just outside of this town. These objects were sending down beams of light, blue, red, and white, And then, moments later, about 200 feet away from them, these witnesses saw two tall humanoid figures who were wearing tight-fitting luminous outfits and walking in the direction of this mountain. Becoming afraid, the witnesses quickly left the area. But the event that really captured people's attention was a multiple witness encounter on the night of December 16, 2003, along the famous Tin Tin Road leading into the town. There was a group of 8 people traveling by bus. These include Benito Salva and his father Ricardo, Julio Rafael Espinoza and his daughter Tamara, and 4 other men. Suddenly the driver of the bus, Benito Salva, stopped the bus and shouted out, "Hey guys, look over there." At this point the passengers all could clearly see a strange glowing object off in the distance. Now farmer Julio Espinoza climbed on top of the bus to get a better view of this and was immediately convinced that he was looking at something very unusual. As he says, "It was incredible. We could see an object with impressive lights, side by side, spinning in a circle at high speed. Then other lights appeared which came and went over the same spot. It made our jaws drop." So this prompted him to hop off the bus and venture off the road and approach the source of the light, which he did so alone. The other people remained behind. And he saw something amazing. As Julio says, "Upon reaching a bramble, in spite of the darkness, the landscape was very well defined. I couldn't go any further. I was moving away from the road and I was getting scared when my eyes started to see something that couldn't be made out clearly at a distance. There was a device measuring some 100 meters wide, resting over some kind of struts or legs, which kept it some 10 to 12 meters off the ground. Some sort of hoses emerged from its middle with lights on their tips. Suddenly, the lights on the object went out, and these strange beings appeared. They walked slowly in single file. They were thin, and their glow was so powerful they blinded me. At that moment, I hid behind a bramble, and I could see when one of them jumped onto a bramble. I don't know how he did it, and he began to pull pieces off of it, as though taking specimens. So Julio watched this for about 20 minutes, and realized he had been there a pretty long time. He decided it was time to return to the truck and tell the others what was going on. And as Julio says, "When I told them what I'd seen, they told me that they couldn't see the creatures because they were very far away. However, they saw the luminous phenomenon which was visible from the roadside." So that's the end of that experience, but it certainly is not the end of the activity in this area. It was just a few months later, on April 27, 2004, that Julio and his 2 sons and their neighbors were outside of Kachi on the National Highway 40 when another UFO appeared. As Julio says, "Suddenly, a luminous object appeared out of the slopes of the Nevado de Kachi, flying at low altitude and zigzagging. It was an intense light that suddenly began moving and stopped above us. I thought it would whisk us away. It lasted only an instant. It was motionless in the air some 50 meters above us, and its white light would become yellowish. It had no shape. It was like an enormous refulgent mass. The entire event lasted some 3 minutes from the moment it appeared, stood over us, and vanished. Many more locals have witnessed this phenomenon." And he's not exaggerating, because it was at 7:30 p.m. on July 10, 2004. Hundreds of people in the town saw a UFO appear directly over the town square. As one of the witnesses said, Javier Rodriguez, "It was a fantastic vision. A perfect disk of bright luminous intensity, moving as it issued forth red flashes, at prodigious speed, changing directions in a startling manner, gyrating at impossible angles for any vehicle known to us. It was perfectly plate-shaped. I cannot say, obviously, that it was a spacecraft from another world or from our own, but I can tell you that it was a phenomenon as inexplicable as it was interesting." Now it was just 3 hours later, on that same night at 10:30 p.m., Susanna Erdine, who was the coordinator of the virtual distance learning system of the Ministry of Education, and Federico Andolfi, who was a surgeon from Valisto Hospital, and another woman, Maria Megua, were driving on their way to Kachi when they had a sighting of something undeniably strange. And I'll just quote Susanna, as she says, "I had always heard and read stories and accounts of UFOs seen by the residents of Kachi, but I never thought I'd have the good fortune to see something as beautiful as it was strange. It appeared all of a sudden and got in front of the car, although at considerable distance. It was enormous and flashed without making a sound. It had multicolored lights and gave the appearance of being circular with portholes all around. The vision lasted for a few minutes, but enough for us to realize that it wasn't a natural luminous phenomenon, but a device built by someone. It vanished at startling speed and lost itself behind the eastern mountains. However, the object reappeared a few kilometers ahead when we were driving along the Tintin segment. It glided along as though suspended beside us and vanished into the firmament as it did before. After seeing that, I believe we have been privileged to have seen what we saw. Any trace of incredulity I may have had about UFOs in Kachi has been dispelled." Now, many more sightings could be listed in this area, including one on June 7, 2006, which really impressed the witnesses. One was Cesar Miguel Naranjo, who said, quote, "It's a wonderful sensation. One is left dumbfounded by the knowledge that what is being seen is not a product of the imagination." Or another witness, Nancy, who said, "The truth is that it frightened me a lot." Now, perhaps the strangest story to come out of this area is that of Werner Jaisli, a Swiss gentleman who says that on the night of November 24, 2008, he saw two UFOs over the town along with a local resident by the name of Jorge Reyes. At that exact time, the town had suffered 3 power failures. Now, seeing these two craft, Werner actually called out to them, "Please come, don't go." And as Werner says, "The two objects landed right above us, and they descended with an impressive light show until they were 30 meters above us. They asked me to make a signal, so I started working." So Werner explains that he received this message to build a large stone formation on the ground in the shape of a star, which he would call, quote, "the Star of Hope." And he worked on this for the next few years with the help of other people, gathering thousands of stones from the area, and built this stone monument that you can see here, which many people are calling a UFO landing pad. He built it in honor of the ETs that he says communicated with him. Werner would later claim to have more than 200 sightings and be in constant telepathic contact with the ETs. He said he received messages of love and peace, and as he says, they are superior. They are capable of performing miracles. So even today, the Kachi starport remains a testament to Werner's encounter and, of course, all the UFO activity that has made this town world famous in UFO history. The name Kachi, by the way, in terms of a Spanish name as a proper name, means, quote, "He demands peace." If I ever go to Argentina, I think that would be one of the places I would like to visit, because I'm curious about it. With so many people in this area seeing UFOs, there's got to be something going on here. And yet, if you look at this town, there's nothing really in the area that would be immediately apparent to attract the interest of extraterrestrials. There is a lot of activity all over the world. Perhaps this is more of a social phenomenon where one person reports an encounter and this encourages others to report their encounter. And this would account for, the existence of UFO hotspots to some degree. I think if that were actually true, we would have far more hotspots around the world. So I suspect there is something about this area that is drawing the interest of what appear to be extraterrestrials. I think that is the explanation which best fits the eyewitness testimonies and the evidence and the facts surrounding this whole UFO phenomenon. All right, let's move to the last and final case. This one is really profound. This one really, I think, has quite some interesting elements to it. I call this one, "I Fully Believe in Aliens." This occurred late one evening on October 28, 2010 in Mount Roy, Pennsylvania. And this is technically a single witness case, although it does involve two people. And this one is just so interesting to me. It's funny, there are a lot of people out there who are profoundly skeptical of this subject. But then people have an encounter, and that, of course, changes their minds. They don't have the luxury of skepticism or disbelief because they've had this experience firsthand. And that's clearly what happened in this case, which had a profound effect on the witness and changed the way they view the world forever. This is an amazing case. The main witness in this case is Christina. That is a pseudonym. She's a young woman who had an experience that left her very concerned. In fact, it shook her up so badly that she asked her boyfriend, who I'll call Ethan, that's also a pseudonym, she asked him to help report her encounter. And I'll just quote Ethan, as he says, "I am writing this report for my girlfriend, as she is nervous and wanting to tell this story. My girlfriend recounts this as a, quote, dream, but the way she tells it and remembers it so vividly scares me, and I believe this could have actually happened. She has never had any odd experiences in her life, so for her to have this, quote, dream seems really strange." So this incident occurred around 2 a.m. on October 28, 2010. At the time, Ethan and Christina were living with her mom and stepdad in a duplex in the woods outside of Mount Troy, Pennsylvania. Her parents were in the room next to them. Ethan takes Christina's story very seriously because, unlike his girlfriend, he in fact has had quite a few unusual experiences in his life, including seeing UFOs. As Ethan says, "I have seen my share of strange things in the sky, and I fully believe in aliens and all of that. I convinced her to let me tell this event as it may have actually happened." So Ethan transcribed Christina's testimony verbatim as she shares what she recalls happening to her. And as she says, "Entities came in the house and abducted my boyfriend." So what follows is Christina's first-hand testimony. As Christina says, "I remember it being very early in the morning. I woke up to 5 or 6 beings in the room. There was a little one standing in front of my closet, 2 tall ones, one standing on each side of the little one to the left by the base of the bed, and 1 or 2 standing off to the right of our bed. The little one was staring at me, not making any sounds or gestures, but by the way he was, I guessed that he may have been their leader. As he was looking at me, the tall one started moving around the room. At this point, I tried to get up and couldn't move any portion of my body. I couldn't scream or do anything. One of the tall ones came over and got behind my head and peered over me, looking down at me. Then he walked away. Then he and 1 or 2 of the other tall ones went over to where my boyfriend was sleeping. At this point, a bright shining light came through the window and was shining on the floor of the room, lighting up the entire room. As it got brighter, the little one and 2 of the tall ones moved towards the window and the light, and I couldn't see them anymore. I lost sight of them. So at the time all of this was going on, Ethan and Christina were sleeping on an air mattress, and they were only about 1 foot off the floor. So this afforded her a good view of everything that was happening. Now Christina continues her account. As Christina says, "The rest of the remaining beings all converged on the light and the window. As they were getting close to the window, my boyfriend's body started to levitate, lifting into the air. At this time, I'm not worrying about the beings, as I'm focusing on my boyfriend elevating into the air. I regained the ability to move, and I started screaming and crying. I jumped onto my boyfriend's body. I remember the impact of me landing on him, lowering him out of the air a little bit, but he continued to rise. I was still screaming, and I lost sight of the rest of the beings. It got super bright, and that's all I remember of the event until I woke up the next morning, unusually late, next to my boyfriend. I remember waking up sweating and feeling very frightened. I felt like I woke up later than I usually did, and I was very groggy.
My boyfriend also felt like he had slept for way longer than he did, and felt like we had both lost time. He had no memory of this as he stayed asleep the whole time during the event. So that's the end of Christina's testimony, and in fact, when they woke up, it was already noon. While she did wonder if this was possibly a dream, she makes it clear that she believes it also may have actually happened in real life, and of course her boyfriend Ethan feels the same way. As Ethan says, she told me about this quote, dream, and that's when I told her about my experiences with seeing things in the sky. What scares me is that she can describe this story with amazing detail and vividly remembers their faces and everything. So it was about 2.5 years after this occurred that they decided it was important to report their experience officially.
There's some really interesting elements to that story. The fact that this lady saw so many ETs in her room, that's pretty unusual. People will see 2, even 3, but double that? That's interesting to me. Also interesting is that usually there are not outside witnesses to someone being taken, but it looks like she woke up and saw her boyfriend being taken. Whether this was a successful, quote, abduction or not is hard to say, because she blacked out. So I suspect probably he was taken, and given that he does report other close encounters, that's certainly a red flag. It's one thing to see a UFO once, but if it's twice or 3 times, and then something like this happens, well, it's very likely that he is a contactee. But such an interesting case, and their testimony is so obviously sincere. It impacted them enough that they decided that this was important to report officially. And kudos to them for doing so, because again, most people don't. So that's it for today. 10 cases coming from all over the world, from 1946 all the way to 2010. That shows that this has been going on a long time. Honestly, I think it goes back to prehistory, but it's just taken humanity a long time to really realize what's going on, and certainly has escalated profoundly since the modern age of UFOs in 1940s, which I think coincides with the atomic age, and when we reach the point of being able to completely destroy our planet. This is when onboard encounters escalated dramatically, and people started getting these messages from ETs warning about nuclear proliferation and pollution and the destruction of the environment and war and aggression, and basically just being on the pathway towards self-destruction. So these cases, have so much to teach us. What an opportunity it is that these cases have to provide us with knowledge beyond our wildest dreams. We're clearly not the only intelligent beings in this universe. We are one of many. So I think that alone makes this subject of profound importance. It's why I do this research, and because I know so many people out there are having these experiences. I'm sure a lot of you watching have had exactly these kinds of experiences. So that's it for today. I really want to thank you once again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode, perhaps learned a few things. And until next time, keep asking those hard questions, keep searching for the truth. Most important of all, keep having fun. And I will see you next week with another exciting episode of UFOs and the Paranormal.